April 1879, Windridge County, Kansas Territory. The prairie sky darkened to a menacing indigo as Hayes Quinn squinted into the distance. A wall of churning black clouds advanced across the grasslands, swallowing the horizon whole. His stallion, Thunder, pawed nervously at the ground, sensing the coming tempest. "Easy, boy," Hayes murmured, patting the horse's neck. At 26, he'd weathered enough prairie storms to recognize this one demanded respect. 6 years of driving cattle had taught him that the frontier forgave no mistakes. Not from greenhorns, not from seasoned hands. The wind picked up, bending the tall grass in rippling waves. Hayes tugged his hat lower, scanning for shelter. The nearest ranch was 10 miles back, the town of Windridge still 5 ahead. His gaze settled on a small structure perched on a distant rise, the new schoolhouse built last autumn. Hayes had avoided town since returning to Windridge. Folks asked too many questions about the war, about his family's ranch lost to taxes while he fought, about the scars that weren't all visible. He'd made his peace with solitude. A man alone couldn't be betrayed, couldn't be left behind. The open range offered all the company he needed. Just him, his horse, and cattle that didn't care about his past. "Shelter, shelter," he muttered as the first fat raindrops pelted his duster. He urged Thunder toward the schoolhouse, the mounting gale pushing at their backs. Hope Calloway had just dismissed her students when the barometric pressure dropped, so suddenly her ears popped. At 21, she'd been teaching in Windridge for nearly 9 months, her first position after graduating from the Teachers College in St. Louis. Her golden blonde hair, usually pinned in a tidy bun beneath her bonnet, had begun to escape its constraints as the wind picked up. She hurriedly latched the shutters, grateful the children had departed before the storm's arrival. The isolation of the schoolhouse, positioned halfway between town and the scattered homesteads, suddenly felt precarious. Hope had accepted the position despite her parents' concerns about a young woman alone on the frontier, determined to prove her independence. A proper Boston lady doesn't abandon civilization for the savage territories, her mother had lamented. But Hope had seen something her sheltered upbringing hadn't prepared her for. Women who owned their choices, who built something from nothing alongside their men, or sometimes without them. The howling wind rattled the windows. Hope added wood to the small iron stove, determined to wait out the storm. Her rented room in town was too far to reach safely now. She smoothed her blue calico dress, a simple garment compared to the elaborate fashions she'd left behind, and reached for her lesson plans. Perhaps this unexpected time would allow her to. The door flew open with a bang, startling a scream from her throat. A man stumbled in with the wind, wrestling to close the door against the gale. Water cascaded from his duster as he turned, revealing a young face beneath his sodden hat. "Beg your pardon, ma'am," he said, removing his hat. "Storm caught me unawares." Hayes hadn't expected to find anyone in the schoolhouse, especially not a young woman standing alone with wide, startled eyes the color of a summer sky. Her blonde hair glinted in the lantern light, and he suddenly felt acutely aware of his mud-splattered appearance. "You're Mr. Quinn," Hope said, recognizing him from town gossip. "The cowhand working at the Bartlett Ranch." Hayes nodded stiffly. "Sorry to intrude. I can head back out if—" A deafening crack of thunder shook the building, answering his unfinished thought. "That would be foolish," Hope said, regaining her composure. "The storm is directly overhead." Another crash of thunder punctuated her statement, followed by the sharp tattoo of hail against the roof. "Seems we're both stuck here, Miss Calloway." "Hope Calloway. I'm the schoolteacher." "Hayes Quinn." He glanced out the window at the worsening storm. "My horse is outside. I need to get him to shelter." Together they ventured into the downpour, leading Thunder to the small attached woodshed. The brief exposure left them both drenched, Hope's golden hair plastered to her face, her dress clinging to her slender frame. Hayes avoided looking directly at her as they returned inside, focusing instead on removing his sodden duster. "There are some blankets in the supply chest," Hope offered, wringing water from her skirt. "For the winter months, when the stove struggles against the cold." The awkward silence that followed was broken only by the storm's fury. Hayes moved to the far side of the single-room schoolhouse, maintaining a respectful distance. Hope busied herself stoking the stove, keenly aware of the impropriety of their situation. "Are you from Windridge originally, Mr. Quinn?" she asked, attempting polite conversation. My family had a place north of here, he replied, his voice flat. Lost it during the war. I'm sorry. Her sympathy sounded genuine. Hayes shrugged. Frontier's no place for sentimentality. Everything out here is temporary. Homesteads, cattle, people. Best not to get attached. That's a rather bleak outlook, Hope challenged. The families of my students are building something meant to last. Communities, legacies. Until drought takes the crops, or fever takes the children, or Indians raid, or bankers foreclose, Hayes countered. I've seen it all. The bitterness in his voice silenced her. Hope turned away, hurt by his harshness yet sensing the pain beneath it. The storm intensified, rain becoming a solid wall of water against the windows. A tremendous crack split the air, different from thunder, followed by a splintering crash that shook the building. The cottonwood. Hope gasped, pointing to the window. The massive tree that had stood beside the schoolhouse had split, one enormous branch crashing onto the roof. Water immediately began trickling through the ceiling in several places. Hayes was on his feet instantly, assessing the damage. Roof's compromised. We need to move anything valuable away from the leaks. They worked together, shifting desks, books, and supplies to the dry half of the room. The physical labor broke through their initial awkwardness. When the valuables were secure, Hayes examined the damage more carefully. It's not catastrophic, but it'll need proper repairs once the storm passes, he concluded. Hope nodded, then gasped as another leak opened directly above, sending cold water streaming onto her shoulder. Hayes instinctively pulled her aside, his hand lingering briefly on her arm before he withdrew it, embarrassed. Sorry, ma'am. Thank you, she replied, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. Something shifted in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, that they weren't merely two strangers sheltering from a storm, but a man and woman seeing each other clearly. The night deepened, and so did the cold. They huddled near the stove, wrapped in blankets, the initial discomfort between them gradually thawing. Hayes found himself surprisingly drawn to Hope's stories of her students, the small triumphs and challenges of bringing education to frontier children. You clearly care for them, he observed. They deserve every chance, she said passionately. Most of their parents can barely read. These children could have different lives. If they stay, Hayes said, but without his earlier bitterness. If they choose to stay, Hope corrected. Choice is what education provides. The conversation meandered through the howling night. Hayes shared carefully edited tales of cattle drives, of the vast landscapes he'd traversed. Hope spoke of Boston, of her decision to come west despite her family's objections. What made you do it, he asked. Leave comfort for. He gestured at the leaking roof. Hope smiled. Adventure, partly. Purpose, mostly. She hesitated. And freedom from expectations. In Boston, my path was predetermined. Marriage to someone suitable, a comfortable life where I'd never need to discover my own strength. Hayes studied her with new appreciation. And have you? Found your strength? I'm learning, she admitted. Though tonight's adventure wasn't in my plans. As midnight approached, the storm showed no signs of abating. They constructed a makeshift barrier from desks and the teacher's platform to shield them from the worst leaks, creating a dry corner where they could rest. You should sleep, Hayes offered. I'll keep watch. For what? Storm bandits. Hope teased gently. Hayes found himself smiling. The expression felt unfamiliar on his face. Force of habit. 6 years riding with cattle, you learn to sleep with one eye open. And before that, the war. His smile faded. Yes. Hope sensed his withdrawal. I'm sorry. I shouldn't pry. It's fine, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Ancient history now. Not so ancient, Hope observed quietly. 1865 wasn't that long ago. Hayes looked at her sharply. Feels like another lifetime. My brother fought, she offered. He came home different. The simple statement, free of pity or judgment, loosened something in Hayes's chest. Different is one word for it. He found his way back, Hope continued. Not to who he was before, that person was gone. But to someone new who could still find joy. Hayes looked away. Some find their way back. Others don't. Hope boldly reached across the space between them, placing her hand on his. It's not weakness to hope for more than survival, Mr. Quinn. The touch burned through him like whiskey on a cold night. Hayes carefully withdrew his hand. Best get some rest, Miss Calloway. Storm might break by morning. But sleep proved elusive for both of them. Hayes found himself watching Hope in the flickering stove light, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the way her golden hair spilled across the folded blanket she used as a pillow. For the first time in years, he felt the wall he'd built around himself crack, just slightly. Dawn brought not clarity but thicker clouds and continued downpour. The prairie had transformed into a vast shallow lake stretching to the horizon. The schoolhouse stood like an island in the deluge. "We could be here another day," Hayes observed, peering through the window at the flooded landscape. Hope joined him, their shoulders nearly touching. "The children won't attempt to come in this. Their parents know better." The prospect of another day together hung between them, equal parts awkward and intriguing. Hayes found himself less bothered by the delay than he should have been. They inventoried their supplies. Hope had her lunch pail with bread and cheese. Hayes had jerky in his saddlebags, and the school had a barrel of drinking water. They would manage. As the morning progressed, Hayes surprised Hope by offering to help fix what damage he could. Together, they used the limited tools available to secure loose boards and redirect the leaking water into buckets. "You're quite handy," Hope observed as Hayes improvised a patch from a piece of slate and some twine. "Necessary skill out here," he replied, but she noticed the pride in his voice. Working side by side, their initial caution gradually dissolved. Hayes found himself sharing stories he'd told no one, about his family's ranch, about the younger brother who died at Antietam, about returning to find everything gone. "That's why you keep moving?" Hope asked as they paused for a simple lunch. Hayes nodded. "Nothing to stay for. Easier to keep writing." "And yet you've been at the Bartlett Ranch for months," Hope pointed out. "Longer than anywhere else, according to town gossip." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Folks talking about me?" Hope blushed. "Small towns have little entertainment beyond speculation." "And what do they speculate about Miss Hope Calloway?" Hayes asked, surprised by his own boldness. Her blush deepened. "That I'm either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish. That I'll either marry the first suitable man who offers or flee back east before winter." "And which is true?" "Neither," she said firmly. "I'm here because I choose to be, not because I'm waiting for rescue or because I'm too stubborn to admit defeat." Hayes studied her, really seeing the determination beneath her delicate features. "I believe you." The simple affirmation meant more to Hope than elaborate compliments from Boston suitors ever had. As afternoon faded toward evening, the rain finally began to slacken. They stood together at the window, watching the clouds break to reveal patches of crimson sunset. "It's beautiful," Hope breathed. After all that fury, Hayes found himself watching her face rather than the sky. "Yes," he agreed quietly. Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, the air between them changed. Hayes took a deliberate step back, reminding himself that women like Hope Calloway, educated, refined, purposeful, didn't waste their futures on broken cowboys with empty pockets. "Roads will be mud pits tomorrow," he said, breaking the spell. "But passable. I should check on Thunder." Outside, the evening air felt cleansed. Hayes leaned against the woodshed wall, drawing deep breaths. What was he thinking? One storm, one night of conversation, couldn't change what he knew about attachments out here. They brought pain, inevitably. When Hayes returned, Hope had arranged their meal and was writing in a small journal. "Planning tomorrow's lessons?" he asked. "Actually, I'm recording this experience," she admitted. "I've kept a journal since arriving. Someday, this frontier will be settled, and people might want to know what it was like during these years." Hayes considered this. "You see a future here. A real one, don't you?" she challenged. "Never thought that far ahead," he admitted. "Perhaps you should," Hope suggested softly. Their second night brought easier conversation. Hayes found himself laughing at Hope's stories of Eastern misunderstandings about Western life. Hope listened, captivated, as Hayes described cattle drives beneath star-filled skies and the camaraderie of cowboys around campfires. When they finally slept, Hayes dreamed, not of war or loss, but of a homestead with a woman whose golden hair caught the sunset. Morning brought sunshine that transformed the flooded prairie into a glittering mirror. Hayes stepped outside, assessing conditions. "The road to town should be passable by midday," he reported when he returned. Hope nodded, an unspoken disappointment between them. Their unexpected sanctuary was ending. "I should escort you to town," Hayes offered. It wouldn't be proper to leave you alone after. A rider appeared on the horizon, followed by another. Soon a small party approached the schoolhouse. Looks like a search party, Hayes observed. Your absence has been noted. Hope smiled wryly. The town matrons likely imagined me washed away. Or worse. Worse. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Compromised by some scoundrel, she said lightly, though her cheeks colored. Hayes stiffened. Your reputation will survive, Hope assured him. Propriety matters less out here than in Boston. The riders arrived. The mayor, the general store owner, and two concerned fathers of students. Their relief at finding Hope safe quickly transformed into awkward assessment of Hayes's presence. Miss Calloway was kind enough to offer shelter during the storm, Hayes explained formally. I'll be on my way now that help has arrived. Hope watched him withdraw, rebuilding the walls between them with each word. The moment was slipping away. The mayor was already launching into concerns about the school repairs, the fathers offering to organize a work party. Mr. Quinn, Hope called suddenly, stepping away from the others. I believe you dropped this. She held out nothing, forcing him to approach. When he reached her, she spoke quietly. The children are presenting recitations Friday afternoon. The community is invited. Hayes hesitated, understanding her invitation. Miss Calloway, I'm not sure that's 3 o'clock, she continued. And I often stay afterward, preparing for the following week. Her boldness stunned him. People would talk. Let them, she said with surprising ferocity. I'm tired of living for others' expectations. Hayes looked into her determined blue eyes and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, possibility. 3 o'clock, he repeated noncommittally. The days that followed passed with excruciating slowness for Hope. She threw herself into teaching, into organizing repairs for the schoolhouse, all while wondering if Hayes Quinn would appear on Friday. When the day arrived, Hope found herself checking the window with embarrassing frequency as parents and townspeople filtered in for the recitations. By 3 o'clock, the room was full, but no Hayes. The children performed admirably. Hope praised them with genuine pride, all while fighting disappointment. As the families departed, she busied herself straightening desks, refusing to acknowledge the ache in her chest. They did well. The voice from the doorway startled her. Hayes stood there, clean-shaven, wearing a pressed shirt beneath his vest instead of his usual work clothes. You came, Hope said, unable to hide her smile. Wasn't sure I should. He entered cautiously, as if the schoolhouse were foreign territory. But I wanted to see the repairs. Make sure they did it right. It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. Would you like to see the improvements? She offered, playing along. They walked the perimeter of the room, discussing the new roofing and reinforcements. When they'd exhausted that topic, an awkward silence fell. I keep thinking about what you said, Hayes finally admitted. About seeing a future here. Hope's heart quickened. And I've been wandering since the war, telling myself nothing lasts out here. But that's not true, is it? People are building something permanent. Families, communities. Yes, Hope said simply. I've been offered a position, he continued. Foreman at the Bartlett Ranch. Mr. Bartlett's getting older, needs someone to take more responsibility. That's wonderful, Hope said sincerely. It would mean staying. Hayes studied her reaction. In Windridge. The implication hung between them. I think Windridge would benefit from your continued presence, Mr. Quinn, Hope said carefully, though her eyes conveyed much more. Hayes, he corrected. After sharing a leaky schoolhouse through a prairie storm, I think we're beyond formalities, Miss Calloway. Hope, she responded, smiling. Hope, he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. Would you allow me to escort you to the town social next Saturday? Her smile widened. I would be delighted. What began that day blossomed through the summer months. Hayes called regularly at the schoolhouse, often riding alongside Hope into town afterward. They attended church socials, picnics, and community gatherings together. Tongues wagged, but neither cared. Hayes found himself planning for the first time since before the war, saving money, sketching designs for a house, considering the future. Hope watched the transformation with quiet joy, seeing the man emerging from behind years of protective isolation. Their courtship progressed with proper frontier speed, which is to say, faster than Eastern sensibilities might approve, but perfectly reasonable where life's uncertainties demanded decisiveness. By the harvest social in September, most of Windridge considered them unofficially engaged. Then came the letter that shattered everything. Hope received it on a bright October afternoon, Boston stationery, her mother's handwriting. Hayes found her on the schoolhouse steps after classes, her face pale, the letter crushed in her hand. "What's happened?" he asked, immediately at her side. "My father is ill," she said numbly. "Mother asks me to return home." Immediately, Hayes felt ice spread through his veins. "For how long?" Hope looked at him, eyes brimming with tears. "She doesn't say, but between the lines, she expects me to stay, to resume my life there." "And will you?" Hayes asked, dreading the answer. Hope hesitated. "He's my father, Hayes. I can't refuse to go to him." "Of course not." Hayes agreed, though his world was crumbling. "When would you leave?" "The stage to Topeka leaves tomorrow. From there, the train east." The suddenness was a physical blow. Hayes struggled to maintain composure. "I'll help you prepare." That evening, they sat on the porch of Hope's boarding house, the October sunset painting the sky in fiery hues. Neither spoke of what this parting might mean. Neither dared voice the fear that she might never return. "All right," Hope promised, her hand clasped in his. Hayes nodded, not trusting his voice. The old certainty clawed at him. Attachments bring pain. Connections end in loss. He'd been a fool to forget that lesson. The next morning, the entire town gathered to see Hope off. She had touched many lives in her time in Windridge. Hayes stood apart from the crowd, his face a rigid mask. When the moment of departure came, Hope broke protocol by walking directly to him, regardless of watching eyes. "I will come back," she whispered fiercely. Hayes wanted to believe her. "Boston's your home. You'll remember that once you're there." "No," Hope insisted. "Home is where—" She faltered, then straightened her shoulders. "Home is where one is understood, where one belongs." Hayes took her gloved hand, pressing it briefly. "Safe journey, Miss Calloway." The formality was like a wall slammed between them. Hope's eyes flashed with hurt, but the stage driver called final boarding. With one last wounded look, she turned away. Hayes watched the stage until it disappeared, then mounted Thunder and rode hard for the open country, pushing both himself and his horse to exhaustion before finally making camp miles from anywhere. Under the star-filled sky that had once been his only companion, Hayes confronted the truth he'd been denying. He loved Hope Calloway. And now she was gone, just as he'd always known would happen. The frontier took everything, eventually. Back in Windridge, Hayes threw himself into work at the Bartlett Ranch. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months. Hope's letters came regularly at first, descriptions of her journey, her arrival in Boston, her father's condition. Hayes read each one dozens of times, but found himself unable to respond with more than brief acknowledgments. What could he say? That he dreamed of her nightly? That the future he'd begun to imagine now seemed like a cruel joke? Better to let her go, to spare them both the prolonged pain of an impossible attachment. As winter deepened, her letters grew less frequent. Hayes told himself it was for the best. She was resuming her Boston life, as he'd predicted. By spring, the letters stopped entirely. March brought the first cattle drives of the season, and Hayes volunteered to lead the Bartlett herd to Kansas City. Distance might help, he reasoned. New scenery, different faces. It didn't. In Kansas City, after delivering the cattle and receiving payment, Hayes found himself in a hotel that served as a mail depot for the region. On impulse, he asked if any mail had accumulated for him. Sometimes ranch hands receive correspondence this way when they were traveling. The clerk produced a thick envelope that had been waiting nearly 3 weeks. Hayes recognized Hope's handwriting immediately, but something was different. The letter had been posted not from Boston, but from St. Louis. Hayes tore it open, his heart pounding. "Dearest Hayes, I write this from St. Louis, where I have paused on my journey west. Yes, west. I am returning to Windridge. My father recovered his health in January. Since then, I have been fighting a different battle, convincing my family that my place is not in Boston, but on the frontier I have come to love. Your silence these months has wounded me deeply, but I refuse to believe it represents your true feelings. Something in your eyes as we parted told a different story than your words. I will arrive in Windridge by the first week of April, assuming the spring rains don't make the roads impassable. If you wish to meet me, I will be on the Thursday stage. If not, I will understand, though my heart will break finally and completely. Whatever you decide, know this. I am returning not just to teaching, but to the place and people who have become my true home. Most especially to you. if you will have me. With all my heart. Hope Hayes checked the calendar behind the hotel desk with growing horror. Today was April 3rd. The Thursday stage would arrive tomorrow, and he was 200 miles away. Without hesitation, Hayes collected the cattle money, purchased the fastest horse available in Kansas City, and rode out that very hour. He pushed himself and his mount to their limits, stopping only when absolutely necessary to change horses at way stations. Rain turned the roads to mud, a fallen tree blocked one pass, and a swollen creek forced a 10-mile detour. By dawn on Thursday, Hayes was still 50 miles from Windridge, his body aching from 2 days of hard riding, his clothes mud-splattered and torn from a fall in the darkness. The morning stage from Topeka would reach Windridge by 2 o'clock. Hayes calculated distances and possibilities with growing desperation. Even with fresh horses and clear weather, he couldn't make it in time. As the sun climbed higher, Hayes pushed on doggedly. Hope was returning, to Windridge, to teaching, to him. She had chosen the frontier over Boston comforts. She had chosen him, despite his silence, despite his fear. And he might miss her arrival because he'd been too stubborn, too wounded, too afraid to respond to her letters. 10 miles outside of Windridge, with the afternoon sun slipping westward, Hayes heard the distant rumble of wagon wheels. Cresting a rise, he saw the stage on the road ahead, moving away from him toward town. "Hope!" he shouted uselessly, knowing she couldn't hear. He spurred his exhausted horse forward. The stage maintained its lead despite his pursuit. As they approached Windridge, Hayes realized he would arrive just minutes behind it, and Hope would step down to find no one waiting. The stage rolled into Windridge's main street, stopping before the hotel. Hayes was close enough now to see passengers disembarking, to see a woman in a blue traveling dress step down. Even at a distance, he would know that golden hair anywhere. "Hope!" he called, pushing his horse to one final effort. She turned at the sound, scanning the street. Hayes saw the moment she spotted him, saw her hand fly to her mouth, saw her take a step forward. Hayes reached the stage, swinging down from his horse with the last of his strength. He was filthy, unshaven, red-eyed from lack of sleep. Nothing like the way he'd planned to greet her. "You came back," he said simply, standing before her. "I said I would." Hope answered, her eyes searching his face. "I got your letter yesterday. In Kansas City." Hayes took a step closer. "I've been riding without stop since then." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You rode 200 miles in 2 days? I couldn't let you arrive to an empty platform. Not after." Hayes faltered, then gathered his courage. "Not after I failed to tell you the truth when you left." The small crowd around the stage had fallen silent, watching the drama unfold. Hayes was beyond caring about their audience. "And what truth is that, Mr. Quinn?" Hope asked, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "That I love you," Hayes said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That I've loved you since that storm last spring. That I was a coward for not saying it then, for not writing it in every letter." Hope's composure finally broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I feared your silence meant you'd changed your mind, that you'd decided I wasn't." "Never," Hayes interrupted fiercely. "I thought Boston would reclaim you, that you'd remember the comforts of civilization and realize the frontier offered too little." Hope stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "The frontier offered me everything I truly wanted. Purpose, freedom, and you." Hayes took her hands in his, heedless of his dirt-stained fingers against her gloves. "I spent my life since the war believing the frontier takes everything eventually. I was wrong. Sometimes it gives instead." "Yes," Hope agreed, smiling through her tears. Hayes dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. The crowd gasped. "Hope Calloway, will you marry me? Not someday, not when circumstances are perfect, but now? I've wasted too much time already, and I don't want to waste another day." "Yes," Hope answered without hesitation. "Yes, Hayes Quinn, I will marry you today if that's what you wish." Hayes rose and, propriety be damned, pulled Hope into his arms. Their kiss drew cheers from the onlookers, but neither noticed anything beyond each other. They were married the following Sunday in Windridge's small church. Hope wore a new dress of cream-colored satin, Hayes a proper suit purchased with his cattle drive earnings. The entire town attended, along with Mr. Bartlett, who announced that part of his wedding gift was the deed to 50 acres adjoining his ranch, land for Hayes and Hope to build their own homestead. By summer, A small but sturdy house stood on that land. Hope continued teaching, writing to and from the schoolhouse each day. Hayes's position as foreman provided stability they'd both once thought impossible on the frontier. On their first anniversary, Hayes led Hope to the hill overlooking their property, where wildflowers painted the prairie in vibrant colors. "I have something to show you," he said, producing a small, wrapped package. Hope opened it to find a beautifully bound book. Inside, in Hayes's careful handwriting, was the beginning of their story, from the moment they'd sheltered together in the prairie storm. "You always said someone should record these times," Hayes explained. "I thought our story might be worth remembering." Hope traced the words on the page, then looked up at the man who had transformed from a lonely drifter into her husband, her partner, her home. "The best stories never really end," she said softly. "They just keep unfolding." Hayes drew her close as the prairie wind swept around them, no longer a harbinger of storms, but the very breath of the frontier that had brought them together. "Then let's keep writing," he whispered against her hair. And they did, through children and droughts, through prosperity and hardship, through all the challenges and joys the frontier offered. What had bloomed in that storm-battered schoolhouse grew into a love as enduring as the prairie itself, wild, resilient, and ultimately unbound by the very frontier that had once seemed so unforgiving.